what broad sections should be covered in my literature review? Obviously, we can't go into the specifics, but broadly, Matthew, what are some key areas that we should be thinking about when we structure our literature review chapter?
Yeah, so a literature review for a dissertation is a little different than the literature review that you're going to find in a journal article. And so I think that's the first thing that we have to wrap our heads around is that we're modeling this work off of dissertations, not of journal articles. So, quick tip, if you haven't already, contact the research librarian at your university, find a dissertation or two that have been recently approved by your advisor that have been successfully defended, and read those so that you can get a feel for what the expectation is at your university. When it comes to actually writing your literature review, in a dissertation, we're going to start with a broad introduction that says, this is my literature review, here's what we're going to talk about, and here's the sections that are coming. We usually write that last because you can't talk about the sections that are coming until after you've written them, right? But you're going to start with the introduction. You're usually going to include a couple of paragraphs about your search strategy. So you're going to identify the keywords that you used. You're going to talk about the databases that you accessed. So a couple paragraphs around your search strategy. And then we're going to move into the actual content of the literature review, which can be organized in a couple of ways. You might organize it chronologically. So if you're looking at something that has developed over time or maybe through different eras, then you might organize your literature review that way. Talk about how this developed from antiquity into the Middle Ages, into the Renaissance, the Romantic period, etc., right? That could be one way to flow. You might organize it by theme. For example, I used the example of English learners earlier. So you might look at the changing population and demographics of English learners. That might be a section. The next section might be the languages that they speak and language acquisition processes for those languages moving into English, learning English as a second language. You might talk about the cognitive development of language and how at the elementary school level, language development looks like this, but at the high school level or adult levels, it looks like this. And so you can kind of break it up into themes like that. Then I also think that there's a more project-oriented approach that you can take where you're taking sort of the pieces of your experiment and you're making sure that each piece of your experiment is thoroughly discussed. So let's say that you're doing an experiment related to burnout. So you might talk about burnout theory. Then you might talk about job demand resource models. And then you might talk about your particular intervention that you're deploying and what that particular intervention has looked like. So it's a little more chunked out. It's not as necessarily maybe as smooth as some of the other models that I've mentioned, but it's really carefully aligned and tailored to your methodology and what you're actually going to do. However you approach it, the key here is we want to make sure that we are giving our reader enough background information that they understand why you're doing what you're doing, why you chose the methods, why you chose the instrument that you chose, and why your research matters.
That was exactly what I was going to say as well. It's really about thinking about your topic and figuring out what information do I need to give my reader so that they can follow my thinking. And so if you're looking at relationships between different variables, you might have a section on each variable and then the interrelations between those variables. But think about what information is needed. You need to engage with those seminal authors, the people who introduced the field, the theoretical framing of your study, but then also the current research as well. And the last bit of advice I can suggest is towards the end of each of your broad sections, and particularly towards the end of your literature review chapter, it's really important to synthesize and pull out the gaps as you see it in the literature. What are the problems, the limitations, the issues? And those should really point to your research. So think about a upside down pyramid. You're going to start broad and general, and you're going to work your way through the literature to get to the specific problem that you are planning to address with your research.